In Venezuela, the second and last day of the colloquium for the 200th anniversary of the Battle of Pichincha continues, with the exchange of papers for the analysis of the historical date and the current geopolitical situation of Latin American peoples. Brazil's Permanent Court of the Peoples will process President Jair Bolsonaro on Tuesday and Wednesday for crimes against humanity during COVID-19 pandemic. And in the United States, at least 14 students were killed in a shooting at a Texas elementary school. Hello, welcome to From the South. I'm your anchor, Gladys Quesada, from the teleSUR studios in Caracas, Venezuela. We begin with the news. Stay with us. So now we begin. In Venezuela, the second and last day of the colloquium for the 200th anniversary of the Battle of Pichincha continues, with the exchange of papers for the analysis of the historical date and the current geopolitical situation of Latin American peoples. The event, which began on Monday, May 23rd, at the Municipal Theater of Caracas, counts with the participation of speakers from Ecuador, Mexico, Colombia, Bolivia, and Cuba. The purpose of the event is to promote the awareness of the Latin American peoples in the midst of geopolitical changes that the continent is experiencing. On the occasion of the commemoration this Tuesday, the act of raising the national flag and the floral offering was carried out to the sarcophagus of the Father of the Nations, Simón Bolívar. This independence battle took place on May 24th, 1822, on the slopes of Pichincha volcano in Quito, where for the first time forces for Guayaquil, Bolivia and Chile participated together with the Venezuelans, a key episode in the liberation campaign of the South against the Spanish Empire. On Twitter, Venezuelan President Nicolás Maduro Moros posted a message together with an emotional video on the date. I sent my hug to the brotherly people of Ecuador on the Bicentennial of the Battle of Pichincha, a feat that invites us to reflect on what we can achieve with unity. The central objective is the freedom, sovereignty, and independence of our peoples. Long live Sucre. The people and the government of Bolivia commemorate this Tuesday the National Day Against Racism and all forms of discrimination, in addition to celebrating the 213th anniversary of Chuquisaca's independence. Authorities reported this Tuesday that the Ministry of Culture called on the population to participate in a march starting at the Isabel La Católica Square to San Francisco, in the center of La Paz at 8 a.m. local time. The march had high citizen turnout and showed their position against all acts of racial discrimination. Likewise, the Municipal Council of Sucre and the Departmental Legislative Assembly of Chuquisaca, with the presence of President Luis Arce, held the homage to the 213th anniversary of independence. During the speech, the president announced the upcoming construction of a Chaco plant that will process chili, crab, peanuts, and sesame. And Panama would like to see an inclusive call for the 9th edition of the Summit of the Americas, an event from which Nicaragua, Venezuela, and Cuba have been excluded. Panama's Foreign Affairs Minister Erika Moons said she hopes this upcoming summit will include all the countries in the Americas, as was the case back in 2015. She recalled that on that edition, 35 countries from Latin America attended, including Cuba. It was Cuba's the first time at such event, and it left a memorable impression. That's why Panama supports the inclusion of the island. Magistrates of the National Electoral Council and the National Register in Colombia have confirmed that there won't be international audit of the presidential election software. The decision was reached after a meeting of more than 3 hours between the two electoral entities. Magistrate Luis Guillermo Pérez assured that the decision not to conduct an international audit will not affect next Sunday's presidential elections. The international audit had been requested by the parties and the National Electoral Council itself. The decision not to have an audit was taken 5 days before the presidential elections, which will be held on May 29th. On Monday, the President of the United States, Joe Biden, made official the designation of Colombia as its non-NATO ally, that is to say, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, after Congress gave the green light to the request of the executive. 1 month after the White House sent the formal request to the President of the House of Representatives, Nancy Pelosi, the South American nation becomes part of the group of 17 countries in the world and the third in Latin America to be an outside ally of NATO. Colombia's entry as an external country to the Atlantic Alliance allows it to access to U.S.-American weapons material, as well as access to loans from this country with which it can improve its warfare and research capacity in this area. And many reactions have been generated at the international level, given recent publications about Haiti and the payment of the debt to which this nation was subjected by France in exchange for its freedom. A U.S. newspaper also claims that the overthrow of the only president who has protested this atrocity is linked to this act. Jean Bertrand Aristide, during 2003, made this questioning one of his most important claims. According to the New York Times, Haiti had to pay for its freedom for an amount between $21 and $115 billion. This will imply the equivalent of 8 times the country's GDP in 2020. Economists claim that the payments demanded by France deprived the Haitian economy of vital resources for its development. In addition to the 1914 plunder, the United States emptied the gold from the coffers of Haiti's national bank to take direct control of its finances. Thierry Boucard, the French ambassador to Port-au-Prince in 2003, claimed that there was some connection between the overthrow of Aristide and his demands for the debt restitution. We'll take a short break now. Join us again after this. So now we are back. In Brazil, the Permanent Court of the Peoples will process on Tuesday and Wednesday the president of the country, Jair Bolsonaro, for crimes against humanity during his time in office at the height of the COVID-19 pandemic's spread in the nation. The process will be carried out in the context of a petition presented by several government entities, such as the Commission in Defense of Human Rights, the International of Public Services, the Joint Society of Indigenous Peoples of Brazil, and the Coalition of Black People for Rights. The trial will take place in the headquarters of the Court of Peoples in Rome, Italy, and in the Faculty of Law Studies of the University of Sao Paulo. Bolsonaro was denounced by the Supreme Court of Brazil, having been accused of engaging in hostile acts that affected Brazilian society, with the launching of an active vaccine campaign and the proposal of inefficient pharmaceutical remedies, promoting disinformation and panic among the population during the worst time of the pandemic in the nation so far. And Brazil's state-owned oil company Petrobras is once again at the center of criticism following the announcement by Jair Bolsonaro's government to dismiss José Mauro Coelho, who presided over the company for only 40 days. Coelho's release comes amid unrelenting pressure over rising fuel prices, which have reached 28% in 12 months, driving inflation in Brazil. Bolsonaro appointed Caio Mário Paes de Andrade, who has yet to be approved by the company's board of directors, to head Brazil's largest state-owned company. The two previous leaders of Petrobras, Silva Luna and Roberto Castelo Branco, were also removed after Bolsonaro criticized fuel price hikes. Now we move on to other topics. The Russian Minister of Defense assured that the objectives of the operation in Ukraine will be met, despite the sanctions and the West's support to Kiev. The Minister of Defense of Russia, Sergei Shoigu, stated on Tuesday that the West rushed to supply arms to Ukraine, fearing a possible defeat of Kiev. The high official also said that the number of foreign mercenaries in Ukraine has exceeded 6,000 people, while advisors and members of private military companies are headed towards the country. Likewise, Shoigu denounced during a meeting of defense ministers of the Collective Security Treaty Organization that the West denies various acts of torture and the execution of Russian soldiers who fell in the hands of Kiev's forces as prisoners of war. On Tuesday, it's been 3 months since the start of Russia's military operation in Ukraine. This morning, Russia's Foreign Affairs Minister Sergei Lavrov said the United Nations Human Rights Council has lost all credibility in this conflict. Meanwhile, Russia's defense ministry reports that in the last 24 hours, its troops have destroyed 680 military targets, among them a warehouse of shells for American howitzers. Major General Igor Konashenkov said that the missile battery and the Russian artillery also hit 73 command posts and 578 areas, which include Ukrainian military manpower and equipment, as well as 37 artillery and mortar units in firing positions. Konashenkov said that more than 177 aircraft, 990 drones, and 3,226 tanks and armored vehicles of the Ukrainian army were destroyed by Russian troops. And the Russian military continued to evacuate civilians from Kharkov to safer areas and providing them with medical assistance. Kharkov residential areas were repeatedly shelled by Ukrainian battalions. The military evacuated more than 60 refugees to the Belgorod region, mostly elderly people, women and children. The Russian government announced on Tuesday that all Greek importers of Russian gas will start paying the Gazprom company in rubles. Authorities of the three main companies in charge of fuel purchases in Greece, such as DEPA Commerce, Mytilineos, and Prometheus Gas, stated that they will make their payments in rubles to avoid an interruption of supplies. According to experts, it will not be possible to replace Russian gas with any other source in the next few years. And in case of default on the payment for the Russian supply, Greek authorities will be forced to cut electricity due to the country's lack of capacity. Meanwhile, the government of Italy has authorized the nation's companies to open ruble accounts to pay for Russian gas, while Berlin is considering the possibility of adopting the same initiative. Now we move on to other topics. United Nations reported on Monday that at least 4 million people have been affected by the worst floods occurring in the northeast of Bangladesh in nearly 2 decades. Authorities said the floods, which began last week, have submerged 70% of the Sylhet district in the northeast and 60% of the Sunamganj district, leaving at least 10 people dead and about 2 million isolated. Heavy rains have caused the two main border rivers in the country to overflow. The president of Bangladesh, Arizavan Bhuiyan, said the state-run flood forecasting and warning center said the two rivers hit their highest levels since records began in the 1970s.
I had 2 houses. The one in the east is totally washed away, and the one in the west is ruined by the heavy current. My sons went into the water to get the paddy. We put them in sacks, but those also got wet and ruined. Now I'm trying to dry them off as a last attempt to save them.
I cultivated quite a large piece of land next to my house. The water took everything away. Now I'm waiting to see how big my loss will be.
And we have more news coming up after a final short break, so stay with us. Welcome back. A school mass shooting in Texas on Tuesday has left as many as 14 school children and 1 teacher dead. The shooting took place at the Robb Elementary School in the district of Uvalde, 90 minutes west of San Antonio, Texas. A school official told the press that the shooting took place off campus and that the Robb Elementary School was under lockdown. Uvalde Memorial Hospital confirmed that local police has not yet provided details about the shooter's identity and motivations. And the U.S. Energy Secretary Jennifer Granholm announced another 40 million barrels to be released from the petroleum reserve. Granholm made the announcement while touring Bayou Kotchad, strategic petroleum reserve in Louisiana, the White House announced at the end of March that President Joe Biden ordered the daily release of 1 million barrels of oil from the strategic petroleum reserve for the next 6 months. Biden will also ask the Congress to penalize oil and gas companies that lease public land but are not producing energy. The strategic petroleum reserve is a collection of underground salt caverns in Texas and Louisiana that can hold more than 700 million oil barrels. The reserve was created after the 1970s Arab oil embargo to give the United States a supply that could be used in an emergency. Beijing said on Tuesday that irremediable consequences will be caused for China-U.S. relationships if the U.S. continues to run path. As President Joe Biden said, Washington's strategic ambiguity policy on Taiwan remains unchanged.
The U.S. has violated its commitment on the Taiwan question, hollowed out the One China principle, and both covertly and secretly incited and supported Taiwan independence separatist activities. If it carries on down the wrong path, it will not only cause irredeemable consequences for the China-U.S. relationship, but also eventually incur an unbearable cost to the U.S. China has ample confidence, strength, and preparations to firmly constrain Taiwan independence separatist activities, to firmly defeat all external interference, and to firmly uphold state sovereignty and territorial integrity.
And on Tuesday, Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus, the incumbent Director General of the World Health Organization, WHO, was reappointed to a second 5-year term by the 75th World Health Assembly, the WHO. Tedros was the sole candidate this year. In his first remarks after his re-election, Tedros said he appreciated the WHO family for their hard work and thanked the WHO member states for their trust. He said the priorities were health, emergency preparedness and response, as well as science, innovation, and digital health. During his first term, Tedros carried out transformations in the WHO to increase its effectiveness and impact at a global level. He also guided the multilateral response to the COVID-19 pandemic, the Ebola outbreaks in the Democratic Republic of Congo, and other humanitarian crises in several countries. A rebel group killed 30 men in Nigeria's Borno state as a response to the death of the cell's commanders in airstrikes launched by the West African country's military. Military officials disclosed the news on Tuesday, days after the events transpired, alleging damages to the telecommunications infrastructure as the cause of the lag in the transmission of information. According to the government report, the perpetrators, identified as members of the Islamic State West Africa province, raided Mudu village in the Digwa area in the northeastern state of Borno and murdered 30 men, a common practice of retaliation among the insurgents since the government implemented a successful streak of ground and air assaults against Boko Haram and other armed groups, where several high-profile commanders have died. According to the United Nations figures, the violent clashes between the insurgents and the government has resulted in 2 million displaced people and 40,000 deaths since 2009 in the eastern region alone. In Burkina Faso, unidentified armed assailants killed 11 civilians and left several missing in attacks to communities in the province of Seno. The governor of the North Central Territory, Rodolphe Sorgo, did not provide any more information on the events, but warned the population in the surroundings to stay alert. Several countries of the Sahel region have been experiencing frequent incursions from armed groups linked to Al-Qaeda and the Islamic State that terrorize the civilian inhabitants in small areas. The frustration with the lack of security in Burkina Faso led to protests that prompted a military coup in January in the West African country that is still unable to find a solution to the offensive. The death toll from the collapse of a commercial building still under construction in southeastern Iran reached 10 on Tuesday, after more bodies were retrieved from the rubble in the city of Abadan. Thousands were trapped in the 10-story Metropole building toppled on Monday, burning shops and even causing more cars in the surrounding streets. Initially, 5 were reported killed, but death toll doubled a day later. At least 39 people were injured, most of them lightly. State TV said rescue efforts were still underway Tuesday and that dozens had been pulled to safety. An investigation was launched as to why the building on Amir Kabir Street collapsed during a sandstorm. Iran's President Ebrahim Raisi offered his condolences and asked local authorities to get to the bottom of the case. So we have come to the end of this news brief. But remember, you can find this and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. And also, if you feel so inclined, please join us on social media for all the latest news. We are on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Telegram. For Telesur English, I'm your anchor, Gladys Quesada. Thank you for watching.